Welcome to a radio show where we lay out the plain truth. It is a place where no conspiratorial rock will be left unturned, no mainstream propaganda will go unchallenged, and all existing reality boxes will be shattered. Piloting the discussion, as always, is the jet-setting international man of mystery, codenamed Plane. Co-piloting the storm clouds along with him are Time Monk veterans Herm, the tea-drinking rabbit Oolong, and other selected guests. This frequency is being broadcast across the secure Time Monk radio channels direct to you for your listening pleasure. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, and ensure all overhead bins are secured because we are most definitely in for a very turbulent ride. So without further ado, I'll open it up to Plane, who will start to tell us about slave grids and the challenges in implementing them.
Well, thanks for the intro. I think grids are the future, right? Grids and clouds. That's all I hear, and big data. I mean, even at the Bilderberg, they talk about this, right? They introduce Petraeus as a man for big data, I think they said. So, boy, this sounds awfully important if some political general who probably doesn't know anything about computers is thinking about it. And then in a recent travel, I stayed with a friend, and he was a victim. They snuck a smart meter into his house. You see, he didn't guard his property safely enough, right? You need bigger, taller fences nowadays to prevent the utility crews from essentially attacking your house and putting a smart meter on it. So now he's all tied up in how to fight them. And this is quite a story because, of course, why do you need a smart meter? What does it offer you as a consumer? Why do you want one of these things? Any ideas?
Basically, so the powers that be know how much, what you're doing with your energy, what times you're doing it, what time everything is going on. They basically want to know everything about everybody.
Right, but when you start putting chips in things, you can also measure other things. Like, let's say, for example, the Rothschilds get their way and we have carbon credits to save the world from global warming, right? Well, then, obviously, your pets need to be chipped, right? Because they fart or whatever, and so you need to buy a license for that. And now they can know where your pet is and how it moves around the house and so on and so forth, right? And you might laugh and you say, this is ridiculous. But everything that's going on today would have been considered ridiculous 50 years ago.
That's why I'm laughing.
But exactly. You can't laugh. They mean it. They're serious.
I know.
This is what they want to do. Okay, so they want to put a chip in your pet, and they want to know where your pet is right now, right? Not only that, they want to be able to tell the health or the blood type of the dog or whatever, right? They're crazy. But you see, the smart meter is more than just a meter for electricity. It's a grid. It's a control. It's a knowledge system. And along with it comes other things like licenses, right? And they don't want to know just about things that use electricity. They want to know about everything. And once you have a meter in, then why not know about the pet? Or why not know where, let's say, can you think about California? Is there anything they've been trying to make smart lately? Yeah, those little things that fire at fast speeds, right? That they want background checks for. They want to make ammunition smart, right? Well, how are you going to check on that? Well, you're going to have a smart meter, right? You're going to have a smart house. You're going to have a smart neighborhood. You're going to have a smart town. And America is going to be the smartest place on earth.
Too bad we didn't have a smart government.
Yes. Well, that's part of the game. So I call these slave grids. And, of course, along with these come clouds. And, boy, doesn't that sound good, white and pretty? They don't talk about, chemtrail clouds, right? We're talking the ones that used to be they used to have things called blue skies. I don't know if the younger people listening to this have ever had a chance to travel somewhere where they have these things. But they used to have, really azure skies and such, right? And they had these things that were white and round, and they called them clouds. And it was beautiful. And they're kind of rare now in most big cities in the U.S. because the air is so lousy. But anyway, these beautiful clouds, that name just sounds so wonderful. I want one. I want a cloud. I want to be part of a cloud. Well, that's very questionable because in computing, whoever has physical access to something basically controls it. If you don't have the physical access, you don't really control it.
Yeah, the agenda is basically to just give everyone dumb terminals and have all their data floating out in cyberspace on the cloud, right?
Yep, data and applications. Yeah.
Now, I remember the old systems. I mean, some of you may know things like the VT100s, and right when I used to play with the internet back. I don't know, did we even call it the internet? It was the DARPANet. Anyway, they were dumb terminals. You were a dumb user, right? The intelligence wasn't there, and you couldn't do much except what you asked to have done. You would retrieve something from, for example, another university, right? But the thing is, it wasn't typically personal. It wasn't about you. It didn't say what your retirement account had in it. It was all, of course, just technical stuff. And that's okay, but isn't it nice to have the freedom that you can do what you want on your own? I mean, why do you want a cloud controlled by some big corporation? They will be able to look in it. It's not a winning deal for you. Now, they're selling it that it's going to be cheaper. But how much cheaper will it really be? I mean, how much are computing costs today? Storage is essentially free today in many ways. So anyway, this is all part of a control system. Smart meters, smart grids, clouds, and the general idea is that you won't control things. There will be this pervasive computing network. And did you ever see the movie Minority Report?
I think I did. Was that based on Philip K. Dick?
Yes, it was. And it had Tom Cruise, and they scan your retinas everywhere you go.
Yeah, I recall. Yeah, I did see that.
Well, that's a smart grid. That's a cloud. That's it. Boy, right? And they can customize the ads, right? Everywhere you go, if you're a man, it'll try to sell something for men of your age, let's say, right?
Oh, the internet's already. The internet's basically already doing that now. I mean, just without the retinal scan.
Yes, but it's going to be a lot more pervasive, to use their terms, right? And that pervasiveness, I mean, do you really want to go into the locker room, right? You're getting out of the shower or whatever, you're lifting weights or whatever, and it talks to you and says, you could use underarm deodorant more. Right? I mean, is this a utopian or is this a dystopian vision here? Anyway, Philip K. Dick was ahead of his time, and he saw a lot of this. And I don't think it's really such a good thing because primarily the issue is control. We don't have control of that. In that Minority Report movie, the people were just victims of this. They weren't benefiting from it. And that's what we need to fight. And the question is, can they really bring this about? By they, I mean the corporate oligarchs or whoever is above them, pick your theory of who really runs the planet. Can they pull this off? And I'm saying there are a lot of challenges they face because what they've been using all along is convenience, right? They sell, get frequent flyer miles if you use your credit card to buy coffee or whatever, right? And so that's how they've been getting data. But some of this stuff is pretty annoying. Like I said with my friend with the smart meter, there's nothing in it for you, It's all a losing deal. So, and the health issues are quite serious. Having a wireless network throughout your house 24 hours a day is not something you want. So, it remains to be seen whether they can actually pull this off because so many people are opposed to it. And you see, for example, the resistance to genetically modified food in the world. The only real place they've succeeded is the U.S., and they may fail on that. They have the power politically in Washington, but you need the consent of people. Even in, let's say, East Germany or North Korea, basically in East Germany, you had the consent of the people for the most part. I know that's a bit of a tough thing to swallow, but I mean, people weren't happy. I don't mean they were happy, but since when have Germans ever been happy, right? Okay, just joking, but you know what I mean. You need an element of consent, and putting in these systems, if they don't offer more than they cost, people aren't really going to want to do it. So I think this is a big issue, and I'd like to hear what others have to say.
Well,
Any thoughts, Herm?
Well, I think one of the things about the consent that you bring up is that the consent, a large part of the media apparatus serves to manufacture consent in a sense. I mean, the narrative, there's a particular narrative I think that perhaps serves, like you were saying before, people that we don't even know how they fit in the network, but they're controlling it. And once I think that narrative is written, I think that's sort of what gets disseminated. Although I have noticed, as far as the cloud computing stuff, that some corporations some of the larger corporations are now beginning to have qualms about having bought into it. So,
well, for one thing, all these clouds and everything, who's going to control them? Right? I mean, if you have a medium-sized corporation and they say you can save money, but the fact is the people who control it are not neutral parties, right? I mean, pick your favorite three-letter agency, right? All these, we've got countless classified agencies, right? All these, whatever, right? They have their alliances and networks and everything. And you can see that in the computing world. I mean, you can't really believe that Google is a neutral party to anything.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, it has got its alliances, and I wouldn't consider a Google cloud to be anything I could trust if I were not on their side.
Wasn't it about 5 or 6 years ago that China decided that it wasn't going to have Microsoft software on its government systems? And I think as I guess they can do in China, they just said we're switching to Linux, and they did.
I think they actually wanted the source code, and they said if they didn't get the source code, I think they weren't going to allow it.
I thought that happened more than 5 years ago. I saw a day or two ago that the Russian government is now going to make it a crime for a government, like official or worker or whatever, to use Gmail or I forget, but certain U.S. intelligence agency fronts.
Yeah, well, even the term Gmail is pretty funny. I got to send my G the mail, or something. I don't know. I mean, I know it stands for Google, but in any case.
Yes, but anyway, the point is other countries are going to be doing that more and more because it's so painfully obvious now that all these things are essentially intelligence operations. Because the U.S. intelligence network has been privatized, right? The guys involved said they were going to do it, and they've done it. And so, it's really very difficult now to separate the NSA from its various branches in corporations, whether you have Google or whether you have Wackenhut. The list goes on and on. But I certainly know a lot of people working in these different things, and I can assure you that there's a very fine line between the private sector and the public sector these days.
What does Gerald Celente always say? The merger of state and corporate entities is essentially fascism.
Yes. On a related topic, I was recently reading a book called Paradise Lost, which is it's by a journalist who was involved and had access to a lot of criminal material in the state of California, and how the state of California has been ruined through various incredibly large scams. Bridges, fast trains, energy, but these are all immense, multi-billion-dollar scams. And there are machines that are involved, Dianne Feinstein and Willie Brown being a key part, but various other players, including all the big Republicans. And When Feinstein got married to her financier husband, who's made billions and billions out of the state of California and the federal government, she said it was a merger of the public and private sector. And I thought that quote just about summed it up, because in my mind, a large part of the decline of California in the last 20 years comes from people around Feinstein, and most obviously her husband. But anyway, getting back to the topic, these networks can't be trusted. They're not something that you as an individual can't trust them, but you as a company or a corporation can't trust. And that is slowing them down big time. Because if you had a company of a certain size, I mean serious size, let's say you've got 500 employees, and you wanted to use Google's cloud, I would not remotely trust them, because they might take all your information and give it to whoever else their friends are. I mean, they're above the law because they're the NSA. And this is really slowing it down. Particularly with the fact that storage is now becoming almost free, right? So why can't you do it yourself? The answer is IT costs, right? Personnel. But, you know, modern software, like let's take for example, database software, is becoming better and better. Fewer and fewer people are needed to manage it. So it's questionable. I would certainly, if I were a CEO, pay a lot more to have control. Anyway, make your competition earn it. Don't make it so that one of these three-letter agencies just gives it to them. But this is slowing them down. The other thing, as I said, like with my friend, the fact is public resistance, let's say with genetically modified food, that's really slowing them down. You know, they wanted to have everybody eating patented water by now, you know, drinking patented water, and you know what I mean?
I thought that's
and
what
here
Coca-Cola is.
Is it patented? Yeah, that's true. I grant you that's a scam of a similar nature.
I mean, really, I mean, it's 5 cents of material, and you can sell it for $1 or whatever. I mean, that's pretty amazing. You know, what a great markup. Anyway.
Yes, but anyway, getting back to the point, though, is they face challenges that some people are a little pessimistic and say this has to happen. But look, genetically modified food is losing in the world. It's basically lost in Europe. And they may do a few tests here and there, but their initial plans and white papers and all that they discussed 10, 20 years ago, they are basically not succeeding with. America being kind of the home of agribusiness and a certain kind of corruption in the civil service is in the worst shape. But still, even here it may fall. I mean, take another one that's been around forever, which is fluoridation of water. That's basically failing. The world is against it. Even in the only place it ever was strong was the English-speaking countries, and gradually it's even being removed in different places there. You know, yes, they can find other ways to poison us, I grant you. They can put fluoride in all the drugs that people are taking, right? Which is what they've been doing. But still, I'm just saying it's a tough fight. There's a real fight going on, and I would not assume that they can easily get everything they want, because they're not always offering you, the public, anything you want.
But the problem, Plain, is if they don't get it at first, they just keep trying to ram it down your throat over and over again. And if they don't get it right away, you know, they'll pull back for a couple of years, make a tweak to it, and then try and foist it on the public again.
Okay, but Oolong, I'm going to argue that now we get into another topic today. There are a couple of other topics. One is the whole open source model and the disintermediation, economically speaking, that we all need to pursue. And this will come about from technology. The fact, though, is that they needed to have the GM foods and the grids and the clouds. They needed to have those things implemented a long time ago. They needed them yesterday. And to say they may get it 10 years from now, I don't think is acceptable for them. And I think that's why they're getting kind of frenetic and crazy. Because the technology that they had 40 or 50 years ago is now kind of in the hands of groups or small companies of a certain size today, right? So, I mean, there are groups right now doing things. There's a group in Germany building U-boats based on the original designs, and then just improving them a bit with, modern software and other things for design improvements and material science, right? And I happen to know someone who is an acquaintance with somebody involved in, the kind of classified undersea stuff, who says, the U.S. Navy has the entire ocean wired, and whatever you do, don't go down there, right? Right? And, well, I'm sure there are plenty of Area 51s in the ocean. Let's just put it that way, right? More than a few. But nonetheless, the point is that, a group of 5 people who are gainfully employed at reasonable jobs, engineers or something, could spend their time building a U-boat. And indeed they have. There are people in Germany who've done that. And, so in other words, we're talking, you can go a lot deeper than, 20 feet or something. I mean, we're talking U-boats here. And you can see things that undoubtedly the official story denies every day of the week. This is from the improvements of technology, custom fabrication, so on and so forth, the designs that are now available, declassification of things, various reasons. But the technology is spreading, and so I'm just saying the stuff that they had kind of hidden away 40 years ago is now becoming available to people who are seriously interested, like maybe me or you. And so they're in a race for time, is what I'm arguing. And to back out on GM Foods is a tremendous loss for them. They've put in so much energy in that. And yes, I know the U.S. seems hopeless. It's the kind of the worst case, but there's a lot of optimism out there, and that's across the board. It's energy, it's custom fabrication, it's in electronics, robotics, cameras. Here in the U.S. when I visit, it seems so pessimistic. But I really think a lot's going on worldwide that, including inside the U.S., that actually offers hope, because the bad guys have been running into the wall many, many times. And so we could go into some other issues. But let's take, for example, Fab Labs, right? There's a famous one at MIT with Neil Gershenfeld. You can find him in TED Talks and other places. But there are a couple of others around the world. And then there are like open source groups that try to create these things like 3-axis CNC milling and various other hackerspace. And anyway, the whole open source movement has moved beyond computer programming and is into design and manufacturing now. And this is incredibly important. I mean, I remember playing with Linux back when it first came out. And all I could think about is, this is great. Finally, cheap Unix for people, right? But all I could say to myself is, yes, but we need this for cheap manufacturing, right? And now we're getting there. We're now getting all of these 3D printers and everything, and places where you can go get things printed, take your design and go have it printed. It's limited. I mean, it may only be in the Bay Area or Boston or whatever. It's not necessarily in Omaha yet. But we're really getting there, and the prices are going down, and the available designs are all over. I mean, I've been thinking of building an undersea robot, and there are groups building these things, and so I can take their designs. I'll save, I don't know, but it'll take me less than half the time if I had to do it on my own, as opposed to just stealing their design.
Have you followed any of the 3D gun printing shenanigans?
Yes, I have. Have you?
A little bit, and I'm wondering, is that something the powers that be are kind of flipping out about?
I think so. I think they're very unhappy, because that just puts it up close and personal to them, because they're basically totalitarian, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't like the idea of you having a knife, right? But they certainly don't like the idea of you having a rifle. That really ruins their day.
I was just going to say most of the guns they've been printing out now are not great quality. I mean, you could fire a few rounds off and then the barrel will snap or whatever, right? But we're just in the early stages now, so I'm sure that's going to get a lot
Oolong, I
better.
disagree. Oolong, that was true a year ago. That's not true of the 3D printing today. You
Oh.
can fire 500 to 1,000 rounds, no problem now.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
And so the designs are going to get better, and more variety, different calibers, different whatever, different parts, and so on and so forth. And all the equipment is going to get better, and all the other related stuff, the CNC milling and everything else, is just getting better and cheaper. And so how do you hide the information? Essentially, the government, by government I mean the U.S. government, came out and said the plans for the 3D printing of guns was, like criminal, basically. They said you can't, export it or other, they put various rules on it to try to make it totally controlled. But this is ridiculous because it's out there in millions of places. And all the servers and people outside the U.S. are just going to do what they want anyway. So I think this is a huge deal because, what does government control mean if, anyway, what can they do? How can they control this? It's just going to get better and better every year.
Yeah, the reality is they can't control it. I mean, they can create legislation, but whether people are going to actually follow it is another thing.
Now, those crazed conspiracy theorists out there have been wondering if recent events, let's say Boston Marathon or whatever, they seem to have these ideas that explosives, gunpowder is this dangerous thing that needs to be controlled. And I'm wondering if they aren't going to try to attack bullets and making bullets as kind of...
I was just going to say, that's probably why the Department of Homeland Security is buying up, hundreds of millions of rounds. I don't think that's to use on the public or for training. I think it's mostly just to corner the market.
Well, they've certainly driven up the prices dramatically of that, and I think they're buying out secretly different companies that make them, and they're making restrictions on importing things and such, So clearly they're targeting ammunition. And California wants to require, background checks and all kinds of things. They're attacking ammunition, there's no question. How successful they'll be, I don't know. I really don't know about that. But I still fundamentally think they're fighting a bit of a losing battle in their war against technology. How do you... First of all, in the case of ammunition or even guns, you're talking about technology that is not really very sophisticated, right? This is stuff people had 400 years ago.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, California being a good example of a very totalitarian place, they can just say, if you do anything, we put you in jail, right?
Have you seen... I was just going to say, have you seen the documentary Who Killed the Electric Car?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I think what happened with that is they made it too good, and the oil companies didn't like it, so they had some of their politicians that were in their pocket essentially just kill it. And they took all the vehicles and crushed them, even although the owners wanted to buy out the leases, they wouldn't allow them to do it. And one of the oil companies, I believe, bought the patent on the battery that was used in the electric vehicle.
Yeah, and I think the one that went into the National Museum had the engine taken out or had the parts taken out.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, so
it's insane.
Yeah, they were pretty serious about getting rid of that.
Although now Tesla's got their electric vehicle out, which is even better. So again, I guess they stopped the original ones, but they didn't really stop the technology.
No, they didn't. And this fight's been going on forever. I mean, but on principle, they destroy things for their control. I mean, you can't even get the plans for, Apollo flights or whatever, right? I mean, right?
Probably because they don't exist.
Well, you mean they should ask Stanley Kubrick's estate, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, there's definitely that, but I actually think they ought to ask the Fourth Reich people, the NASA Nazi crowd behind the scenes.
Yeah, the Nazis had stuff that actually worked. They didn't need to do it in a movie.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The real the real flight to the moon took off from the mountains in Argentina. But anyway, don't say that in public. But anyway, so going forward with this though, the fab labs and all these things, 3D printing, these are real challenges for the powers that be, because look, they already have more money than they know what to do with. It's all about power and control at this point, and their factional fights with other powers like Russia or China or whatever, right? And 3D printing, what does that offer them? Nothing, and that's why they don't promote it. I mean, it offers the end of Walmart, because so many things you'll be able to make yourself. The design will be there, and the cost will be cheap, and the time to market will be fast. And, in other words, now we get into this word I use called disintermediation. And if you look into this, Catherine Austin Fitts talks about this a fair bit. But the idea is, in economic terms, what are you bringing to the table? And is there somebody in the way who's an extra party who is essentially costing you money, or in the case of the government, or somebody restricting you somehow, right?
The banks and the government.
Right, and so the banks are the perfect example of that, because they're now in the way of everything. They have cut a piece out of everything, right? But let's take an example of Walmart. What does it do for you? Well, it goes to China, to some big factory, and says, here, make this whatever, lawn chair, right? Okay. They go there, they make it, they ship it on a Walmart boat to a Walmart port, put it on a Walmart truck, and they send it to you, right, to your local Walmart. That's the service that Walmart is providing to you, right? Okay, well, fine, but let's say that there is a standard lawn chair design that's open source, and it's not like the quality of these things you buy from Walmart's any good. The quality is usually pretty lousy. A local place that we'll call it a 3D printer store, says, we can make that. The plastic's easy, and then the metal, we got this thing here. And, we can make it for whatever, $10 or something, $20. But anyway, it's basically the same. It might be cheaper. Depending on the item, you'll get it sooner. You can customize it the way you want. And Walmart isn't really offering anything.
You cut out the shipping too, right?
You'll cut out the shipping, the delays, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see that the economics of that are such that Walmart is no longer very useful, right? They're just a middleman. They're not actually doing anything for you. Now, I mean, they're shipping it, but that's just shipping. So what other cases of this phenomenon do we find? Well, we find it, I mean, Catherine Austin Fitts talks about it, where a community sends all of its money to New York to banks and then borrows it back at 4 times the interest rate, right? If you live in, pick some little town, you live in wherever, Wairika, California, and your city takes all of its pension funds and everything and ships it to New York. And they get a whopping, 3% interest or something. And then you find out, yes, but all their projects, road construction, everything gets handled through New York, through the same banks, and you end up paying, pick some number, 8% or 12%. This is totally ridiculous. What is the service that these New York banks are providing? Well, the real service is that they bribe your politicians, to be honest. They're not really experts in, arranging things the way they pretend. Because you see, like is it Jefferson County in Alabama, where they bankrupted the county and the pensions have been slaughtered and everything, and like half the city council and the mayor are in prison. But the bankers who arranged all the same deals didn't get punished at all, right? In other words, the whole thing was fraudulent from the get-go, but the bankers walk, and the politicians go to prison for it.
Same old story.
It's the same old story.
Right.
But we need to cut these guys out. We need to, so disintermediation, in a sense, means go local or go smaller, right? California doesn't need New York to do its stuff for it. California has all the talent it needs. And, Los Angeles has all the talent it needs. We need to come back and not pay for these needless services like having whatever, Walmart design a chair that's made in China, if indeed the chair can be made reasonably well in the U.S. And I'm arguing that with the new technology, it can be. So this is a big, big change, and it does not work well for the powers that be. Because after all, their control is essentially these choke points. That's what the disintermediation is all about. It's about these choke points where they strangle you. They charge you 5 or 10% needlessly, but they also essentially force you to get on your knees and grovel, right? Like they offer you things like tax exemptions and other things, but really you shouldn't even need it. You should just be able to do what you want. So this is a big, big deal. I mean, going forward, as the 3D printing and all this stuff gets better, look at computers or electronics or something in the last 15, 20 years, how much better it is. Now just imagine that, take for example, you have a phone and you download a design that you like, whatever it is, for a chair or whatever it is you're thinking you want to build. And you modify it slightly and you send it over to the 3D printer. And you pick it up on the way home from work, a couple days later. Walmart can't possibly offer the variety of things that you can have on the internet.
Well, it's the ultimate customization. I mean, it's great.
Right, it's mass customization. You can have what you want.
It also is interesting because we were talking about export of jobs on one of the last shows, but it's an interesting way to bring actually jobs back to the United States. Of course, not as many as probably went out, but certainly whoever's running the 3D print shop is making a living, so that's good. I mean, but also, you've got to also free up the slaves. We've got to free the workers at Walmart, right? Now you could say they don't want to be freed; they just want their minimum wage. But we need to change the system from a control corporate system of essentially needless stuff that just kind of enslaves you, to a more open system where anybody can do anything, right? I know that sounds hard to do with today's world where people have been so dumbed down, but we got to get started anyway. Otherwise, it's hopeless. I mean, we got to fight the dumbing down, and we've got to make it so people think that it's open and they can create something. I mean, even not that long ago, 20, 30 years ago, you'd see young people who were car fanatics or something, right, or whatever, gadget fanatics of some sort, and they'd specialize in that, and then they could kind of make a business out of it, right, sound geeks or whatever. And we need to make that essentially common. We need to make that the norm so that those who don't go into specialized education or whatever essentially think it's normal that you become an expert in something and you provide a service and you create things. Sort of like the U.S. did, 50 years ago or something, or 80 years ago. So I'm quite optimistic about this. I think this stuff is coming on fast, and I think it's very threatening to the powers that be. And that's why you don't see very much promoting of the whole 3D printing Fab Lab stuff. I mean, this stuff should be getting Nobel Prizes already. But it's not in the news. I mean, you can find it on the internet, but it's not talked about.
It's talked about only in a negative light. For instance, if they're going to talk about 3D printing, they're going to rail about gun printing, and some kid's going to print a gun and take it to school, etc. Right? So they're basically only talking about it to attack it.
Well, Call it a my perspective, but I just say if they attack it, I'm for it. Whatever
Well,
they're against, I'm for. So yeah, of course they're against it because they work for those agencies and Walmart and everybody. So they're the big banks. So they're against everything that we ought to be for. By the way, let's move on to the topic of other open source ideas. So we're kind of talking about open source to build things, right? Chairs or car parts or whatever, different things, and that's cool. But there are a lot of other questions. I mean, one would be, can we change the rules of the game with stuff like bitcoins? I'm not as knowledgeable as some people are on that topic, but Oolong, do you want to say anything about them?
I'm not a big fan of them only because I'm more into tangible assets like metals. However, I do think that bitcoins are very interesting in that it decentralizes the money-making process from the central banks and kind of basically takes it out of human hands altogether, which some people may think is a bad thing. I don't know. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, well, I think the Achilles heel of Bitcoin is that it has to run on the controlled net, at least for now. So things like happened to Mt. Gox can happen where the ISP gets raided and closed down. On the other hand, the peer-to-peer nature suggests that if you don't need to exchange into another currency, and if you can do a peer-to-peer exchange of services or goods for services, etc., then the Bitcoin could be construed as a way to keep track of essentially a barter system, and in which case it would be much harder, even with a controlled net, to attack the peer-to-peer. That was my feeling from looking at the recent Bitcoin debacle. What do you think, Plain?
Well, I mean, I tend to prefer physical things that I can trust, jars of honey or whatever. But as far as it goes, the idea is very interesting. But I think it failed in the sense that you can't have the value go up and down radically. If it's worth $1 today and $10 tomorrow and $3 the next day, too many businesses don't have those kinds of margins, right? They can't take the risk. So that was a weakness to me, is that it essentially became a speculation, and so it made it so most businesses couldn't use it for that reason, unless they were in the mood for speculating at small levels. But from a longer-term point of view, you have to have some idea of what is this thing worth. So I thought that was a bit of a problem. But I thought it was an excellent exercise in trying to see how these problems would work out. And also frankly, you see how the government will respond. And I think the answer is they use the idea of a money transmitter as one of their key attack points today and everything. So, I'm glad that it was out there and tested, but I really have doubts about how you can ever essentially go from the theoretical into dealing with dollars without the government clamping down on you.
Well, I think the volatility issue on Bitcoin could be addressed by not having it be interchangeable with a currency. I mean, that would pretty much end that right there. The value would be determined by what you could get.
But how do you stop people from selling or buying it if it's something that exists? I mean, let's say I own a basketball. I mean, I can always sell it, right? I mean,
right.
There's somebody who's going to say, by the way, I'm in the market for buying and selling basketballs or whatever, right? I mean, everything, I hate to say it, but everything has a price, right? Just everything tangible out there, somebody is going to say, I'm the market maker for that.
Yeah, well, I guess, yeah. How do you get around the market maker question? But I guess that would only come into play if you could actually, buy bare bitcoins. rather than a Bitcoin attached to a service or a good.
Well,
but
yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
another thing. But there's always going to be somebody in Hong Kong who says, "Hey, I'm a market maker for whatever," and as long as there's an internet that lets you get to Hong Kong, that's gonna be there. I think it's a very interesting experiment. Some people have been really, really optimistic about this, like somehow this is going to take down the banking system or something. And I find that to be I think they
Optimistic?
think the banking system will take down the computers before, you know what I mean? They have a lot of power, and I kind of doubt that anything could be quite that dramatic. But now here are the other aspects of this, though. First of all, a lot of us think that we need to think, I don't know if you would say about positive directions, but we need to put our energy and focus on trying to come up with solutions and not put our money, mind, and energy in the negative stuff, right? And so from that sense, it's been a success. We've put a lot of mind power into promoting alternatives to the, Federal Reserve banking system, right? And I'd say that's been a success.
What it's
people
done.
are thinking.
Well, what it's done is it's proved how the monetary system can be decentralized, as opposed to what the powers that be want. They want to centralize everything, right? So it's basically the exact opposite approach.
Yes, and here's another thing. Let's say, it may not happen now because the U.S. is too controlled, but let's say the rest of the world kind of hangs in there, somewhat liberalized, I don't know, but let's say someplace. Let's say China says we don't like the dollar system, and they create some kind of system out of Hong Kong, maybe. And it's kind of, I don't know, call it a Bitcoin open source kind of system, but it's got in Hong Kong, you can always go redeem something for an ounce of gold or whatever, a gram of silver or something, right?
Where do I sign up?
Right? And that would be really, really tempting for people who've been looking for alternatives.
Well, doesn't gold money have a depository in Hong Kong? I know it never gets mentioned in the same sentence as Bitcoin, but it seems to have passed at least the initial scrutiny of the people that regulate the banks. Unlike e-gold that got trashed, but it hasn't. I don't see that it has taken off either. And there you can redeem. I think they've added a couple of other metals. So it functions.
But I thought there were a couple of question marks with them that people were talking about, and I hesitate to get into that because I'm not knowledgeable enough. But there were a couple of issues. But there's also the question of how you transacted. The Bitcoin is essentially anonymous.
Right. That's the issue.
If you design your affairs in a certain way, and that the other system isn't, right? And so the anonymity means essentially that, we know all the good and bad. It means that people can do stuff and not pay tax or whatever, right? And we understand that the governments are not going to be very keen on that. So in other words, it's much more like cash. We could have a long discussion about it, but I'm just saying it's interesting. We're seeing a real-world test of an interesting technology. Some of it may be copied later by other things, and I'm suggesting, maybe China would like to see how something, with gold or silver would play out, and they could do it in Hong Kong. I don't really know. This is all speculation. But there are a lot of other possibilities for open source going forward. And I think we need to think about them because, as I said, we've been disintermediated. We've been turned into slaves where we don't need to be. If I want to do business with you, why do I need to go through New York again? Right? Why do I need Geithner or whoever? Right? What are they bringing to the table? They bring trust and reliability. Is that what they bring? They bring smoothly functioning, reliable market. What is it again that they supposedly are bringing? Because remember, in Economics 101, the world is a perfect place, and economics is like sent by God, and everything works smoothly. Well, I'm just arguing that I don't know. They're mafia types who've gotten in the way of us doing business, and they charge us a fee to do everything. And in the process, they control us. And we need to find a way to get around them. Now, in the case of Bitcoins, we get into the whole issue of, legal stuff and tax evasion and all that. And I'm not really trying to focus on that. I think it's safer or better to talk about stuff like cutting out Walmart. But the principle is the same. We need to, the county, city in Los Angeles needs to not have to deal with New York to do business. And you and I, if we want to do business, we would really be far, far better off if we could have a Bitcoin system that I didn't and you didn't have to pay 3% to Visa and 3% to Geithner. That's an incredible incentive for us to develop this. And I think they're going to have a tough time stopping it. At some point, they may just pull out the federal agents or whatever. But I'm just saying that this offers a lot of promise. And unlike that smart meter that they sneakily stuck on my friend's house, this is something that you and I would want, right? There's a huge difference. There won't be resistance. There'll be people begging to do it. And that's why they don't talk about this. You could look at the media all around the U.S., and there's very little discussion of this whole concept of cutting out the middleman through modern technology. It's all about how we can create a new company. Have you noticed all the business magazines? Here's the new and latest Facebook. Here's the new and latest whatever, right? Right? But it's never like, here's the way to cut out our corporate masters. Here's the way to cut out our banker masters. You know what I mean?
Well, the advertisements would just drop. It would be
of course. It's going to be this is going to be an ad busters episode. Right? There won't be any ads in this magazine. Right. I know. I'm aware of that. That is a problem. But anyway, so there's a positive side, and the Bitcoins are just an opening start in ideas and how to do this. And, I'm not so happy that it's going to be attracted to the dark side of, the people like drug dealers and things like that. I really, for starters, would just like a push to try to eliminate bankers and New York and D.C. from things. But let's see how it goes. And then, again, new ideas over time. Moving on with the whole idea of technology and open source, I think we ought to get into the idea of cheap energy or energy innovations. I think we discussed this a week or two ago, but are you familiar with Andrea Rossi and his ECAT?
Only what you told us last week.
I went on his website and hunted around a little bit, and I thought it was pretty interesting, although I noticed that there weren't any plans freely available, open source plans for his technology. So,
well, he's not open source, but he is possibly a radical breakthrough in technology for energy. And there are people who claim and certainly are working on similar things to what he's doing, which is kind of there are different theories as to how these things work, but kind of using a catalyst to get energy in the process of, let's say, a very slow kind of level of transmutation. And just call it like a low-level nuclear kind of thing that's gradual and whatever, but as a practical matter, it's a very, very cheap way to get energy. And more and more serious people are saying he's really kind of developed stuff. And he's secretive, and he may not be a guy you would personally trust with your young, whatever, certain issues or whatever. I don't know. I don't know him personally at all. But I'm just saying inventors may be paranoid. Inventors may have to cut corners to raise money. There are a lot of reasons that you can criticize inventors, right? And frequently good inventors go bankrupt once or twice, right? If you look at the history of successful inventors. So what I'm trying to say is you can't expect this guy to be a clean academic type. That's not the kind of person who's a successful inventor. But I would just say, looking at his stuff, you can say there's something there, and there are a lot of people looking into it, and the odds are some things are going to be coming out. And he's hiding stuff because if he doesn't hide it, then everyone, he won't have a business.
I've got a question for you, Plain. Now, what do you think about the patent office? Do you think that do you think they help people, or do you think they basically monitor the ideas that come in, and when they see something that's too revolutionary, they basically just try and quash it?
Well, I think the patent office was a very good thing for a long time. It was one of the things that made America great. There were 10, 20, 30 things that made America into what it was, and that was one of them. But unfortunately, we've, in so many ways, gone astray. We've lost what we were doing. And now intellectual property rights, patents, copyrights, all these things are now used to benefit existing power holders and give the shaft to the average person on the street or to new inventors. So now, it's the usual. It's like we started out with matter and we're turning into antimatter. So we now have the anti-patent office. And I can even speak of other things where, for example, let's say software. One of the most famous big-time CEOs in the software world was notoriously against software patents forever. I could find you many quotes or whatever from him saying it was a very, very bad idea. And eventually he lost. The industry and the government in the U.S. have moved to patenting everything. And now, of course, his huge corporation brags about how they have, 1 million software patents or whatever, and they're endless lawsuits because he's famous for lawsuits, as weapons in all of their wars. And that's not a game that small companies or individuals can play,
Right.
So I don't think I think we're now on the wrong side of the equation. Anyway, my opinion. And as far as do they turn things over, well, come on now, be serious. The U.S. has been a national security state since the late 40s, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of like official? There are, last I knew, 7,000 patents that were requisitioned by the military. You can't do anything with them. If the inventor does anything, he'll be put in jail. So you spend your life working on something, you give it to them, and then they quickly come back and say, congratulations. If you discuss this phone call or if you continue to do anything along these lines, we will put you in jail forever. That's America, and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's official government policy.
So,
and then if you add in all the ones they buy up or otherwise threaten or whatever else they might do, you get the idea.
But just imagine, if all these patents that are kind of sitting in a basement somewhere, if they were, instead of gone through the patent office, if they were just put out in an open source format, and whoever wants to take this and modify it and improve it, or throw 2 or 3 of these patents together to make something really cool. It's really set society and mankind back enormously when you think about it.
It has, but on the bright side, I used to work in some patent research in a past life. And my conclusion, and many of my fellow coworkers and all, was that patents are routinely fudged and otherwise full of lies. For different reasons, but one thing is big corporations don't really want people to know what they're doing. So I'm not totally convinced that patents have as much information as people think. And in our discussions here we get into some strange stuff, right? We get into ultra cheap energy, or is there a breakaway civilization that has bases in the bottom of the oceans, or whatever, on the back side of the moon or something. I don't think you're going to find any patents that necessarily talk about the challenges of building a base at the bottom of the ocean. You know what I mean? It's not a question of access to the patents. It's a question that they're not there. So, but I agree with you. Sure, there's these 6,000 or 7,000 patents that essentially became forbidden topics I'd like to read them for sure. And if other scientists could read them, we'd be in much better shape. But we're limited. What can you do? I mean, I'm just hoping. I think the problem we have to a large degree is that the U.S. dominated the world after World War II. And so the people who controlled the U.S. became incredibly arrogant and evil and so on and so forth. And if we had open competition with whoever, the Brazilians or Chinese or Indians or whoever, it'd be a much better world. And I'm arguing, and this is proof that I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist, but I'm arguing that the Cold War was a construct. It was not a real thing. The Soviet Union was propped up by Western money and technology. And so they only kind of sort of fought us in agreed upon rules of engagement. The current situation with our competition with Russia or China is a much, much more serious challenge to the powers that be in the West, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And I think this is very good news. And I give you an example. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was Kennedy versus Khrushchev, right? And we know the story. The U.S. put in nukes in Turkey, and Kennedy agreed to remove those, and the U.S. military was furious, right? Lemnitzer and all that, they considered Kennedy a communist for backing down, and you know the story, right? Okay, well, what happened? Not very long after, Kennedy had an accident, and, Khrushchev was removed. David Rockefeller took a visit to Moscow, spent a week there, and then like a week later, Khrushchev was removed. That should tell you that the Soviet Union had a good old boys network that needed the money that the West was giving them, because communism wasn't necessarily the most efficient form of running things. So in my opinion, the situation today is much, much more open than during the Cold War. The Cold War was not an open situation, and proof of that is if you look into anti-gravity, there was tremendous progress made in the late 1950s, and then it just vanished. And that'll be a topic for a later show.
So do you think that China and the Soviet Union are basically just going to say the hell with the United States, the hell with your patents, we're just going to do what we want, and if you don't like it, too bad?
Well, geez, that's a big question. I mean, first of all, Russia is like the biggest, oil and gas producer. I don't think they want new energy technology out there, do they?
No, true.
So I don't know that, I don't really think that Russia is going to come to our salvation when it comes to ways to not use oil and gas. I think that China and Asia in general are developing endless kinds of better energy technologies, and they're in use all over right now by big companies or electric companies or whatever. And they're not in use in the U.S. at the moment to any degree the same level. And that's a tragedy, but again, that's because the U.S. is dominated by the oil and gas powers. But anyway, yes, I think that China and Asia in general are going to lead to much better energy technologies. And I think they already have, but it's kind of something you have to look into, and it's not, again, talked about in the press because they don't want you to know. They want you to think about great new ideas like Facebook or some app for your smartphone that will make you even more evaluated by the slave group, right? Right? They don't want you to think about something like, wouldn't it be nice if it, cost me half as much money to drive my car? Right? That's not a useful application, right? No, something to like show yourself in the shower is what they want you to work on, right? And that's, anyway, moving on. Yes.
Plain, do you think that's one of the reasons why I don't see too much cogeneration in the U.S. as opposed to, say, Europe? And I don't know what the situation is in Asia, but it's always surprised me that a Fiat sells a cogeneration motor that you attach to a generator and your hot water, and you power up your, if you have a house or apartment, you can power up the heat and the electricity. But I don't see a lot of that here, and I had never considered that maybe there were some reasons other than some shadowy market shenanigans going on in the background.
Well, there are different issues. One is Italy has never been totally on board the whole Anglo-American control grid. And so there was the creation of the whole Italian oil company that the Western powers fought endlessly. And then there's like Berlusconi, who was friends with Putin. And that's why you see endlessly in the Western press how bad Berlusconi is, et cetera, et cetera. It's because he's friends with Putin. And he was friends with Gaddafi. I mean, he said the other day, Gaddafi was loved by his people. He's the most popular politician around. And you're not supposed to say that. And, of course, you never hear that in the Western press. You just hear about how many topless women were at his latest party, right?
Right.
And so Italy has not been totally part of the program, I would say. So, actually, I won't get into personal stuff, but I happen to know a guy whose father was in the, let's just say there were Gladio victims. How's that? in government, Parliament, Prime Minister, and others in high places, and I happen to know one son. And just suffice it to say, the people in Italy know about Operation Gladio and what NATO is all about. And so they don't have the same positive view.
No, they certainly don't. And after the war, it was,
anyway, they know their history better than we know our history. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, that's part of it. But the other bigger thing is energy costs tend to be higher in Europe, so things are a little bit more economical. But I really think it's the oil domination. The oil crowd has been so politically dominant here that, over there, if they paid any more for energy, they couldn't compete. They couldn't sell any products in the world, right? So they just have to have some kinds of energy systems to keep the prices down. Otherwise, they just couldn't exist. So I think that there are different reasons for this. But also, it's a bunch of different countries, different languages, different histories. And, maybe a local inventor had a really good cogeneration system starting a long time ago, and, that just continued. I happen to know of researchers in energy in the U.S. who have experience, like family experience, with, for example, steam engines that were very, very effective, and they were all bought up and shut down. And the owners of them became quite rich, but GM bought them all up and just shut them all down. And, the story's endless, but, it's just much more controlled in the U.S. I know a guy who was involved in, they have these challenges, like design cars that can go cross-country and whatever, like solar and others. And, he was on a team, and they just totally dominated the field, right? Dramatically better than, let's say, General Motors with their millions of dollars in a car. So what do you think happens?
He hung himself in the shower.
No. What happened is
they buy him out.
Well, the event doesn't happen next year, and the magazines that are supposed to talk about things like clean green energy or solar or whatever, right? Somehow they don't say anything about what should be a dramatically optimistic thing, right? An incredible achievement, right?
It was too good.
Because all of the advertisers of any size say, well, if you talk about that, we'll never advertise with you again. And not only that, we'll start up a competing magazine and guarantee that you go bankrupt. Right? That's the American way.
And pay someone to start your car in the morning, right.
Yeah. Well, that's another issue, but I don't think it got that bad. But I think it was just like, it will just be the, whatever you want to call it, the redheaded stepchild or something in the room that you're just never supposed to mention. Oh, by the way, 5 years ago, there was this group that did far better than anyone else with far less money. Why don't you talk to them about how they did it? And that's unfortunately, that's America, and we got to change that. And it's going to be a tough fight, but hopefully things like Asia and Italy and other places, Brazil, are more open, and I think it will change. And then it'll come back to the U.S., but probably it'll take a while.
Do you think that, this is gonna sound kind of out there, But do you think that at the end of the day, all their plans for New World Order and their control grid system, do you think that eventually the end game is to, I don't know, set up some type of socialist system and then basically allow some of this free energy stuff and these improvements to get out there? Or do you think that that's just too optimistic?
Well, they need the free energy to run all the robots in Skynet, right? I mean, right?
And not to mention PRISM. Would probably take
prisons. Well, yeah, the prisons they're going to need. Well, I think they are. I think this Andrea Rossi ECAT is essentially something that is like a controlled test by the powers that be. They got their hands around it to some extent, or behind it, or under it, or whatever. Of course, I think that they want to have controlled stuff so that the approved corporations get free energy. Yes, or very cheap energy. Yes, I think they want to do that. I think they're rolling that out over time, and they're testing it. And it's possible that some of these good things in Asia are actually watched by them, or like joint deals with China, or whatever, right? Stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it's not all 100% optimistic. They have their plans too, right? But I think we have to focus on our plans mostly. I mean, we have to do what we can and not always just sit and say, oh my God, the New World Order is bad and evil and satanic and it's coming to, burn the American flag, right? I mean, first of all, you could argue that really it's been here for centuries, right? It's just a question of how they've been practicing genocide a long time,
They just gotten better at it.
I was going to say, eventually they'll get it right.
Technical. They got more white papers on it now, and you know what I mean. They got drones or something, but they had plenty of, and even stuff like concentration camps. What do you think happened in the Boer Wars? I mean, what do you think Britain did to the poor Afrikaners? I mean, it killed far, far more women and children than soldiers. So in some sense, this is nothing new. We wiped out the Indians, the whole list of things. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, instead of just saying, oh my God, only a rapture can save us, or only a Ron Paul can save us, or whatever it is you might think, I'm just saying only we can save us. And I see some reasons and for hope in this fight, and I see all kinds of problems on their side if I were a general working for them.
One of the interesting things I've noticed, Plain, is that there's also a lot of low-tech solutions that are coming out. Like people building houses out of essentially mud and straw, cob houses, and rocket mass heaters and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely. That's worth a lot of discussion. I mean, even just reuse of plastic bottles in constructive ways, right? Again, we have this model, this economic corporate fascist model, where we're supposed to be consumers, workers and consumers. You work to make the money so that you consume everything, right? And so you can never have your own kind of heater or your own kind of recycling thing that builds useful, sheds in the back or stuff like that, right? And you're right, this is basically low tech, and I think it's coming soon. But it may come, again, out of countries in Asia or Brazil or something like that, because they don't have the same regulatory environment. I mean, basically, it's not exactly a joke to say almost everything in the U.S. is illegal, really, push comes to shove. There's always a code, right?
Yeah.
Right. We're not arresting you for free speech. We're arresting you for walking on the grass. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. I mean, there's always some catch, and I'm just saying that, if you travel around poorer countries, you can see they just don't have the infrastructure of any sort to hassle people, for like building some kind of heater or way of recycling bottles or glass or whatever. They're just going to do it, and there's no stopping it. And the political pressure in those countries is overwhelming that they all need cleaner and better energy sources, right? Everybody is against cutting down all the trees and turning it into smoke that pollutes the skies. And So yeah, I think these other energy technologies are very important, and some of them are just environmental. They're just cleaner, better ways of doing things. And we need to change the laws in making buildings and other things. There needs to be a lot more options, at least in non-city areas. We just simply have to allow people to build a yurt if they want. Whatever, yurts rights or something like that. So that's another topic. And then possibly, I guess what I would say is kind of my last topic for the day is that clearly part of the grid of control is water. And the bad guys have been buying up all the water systems around the world and forcing them to be privatized. And, I think maybe one of the 5 reasons for the war in Libya was the tremendous water system that they built.
The aquifer, yeah.
Yep.
And by the way, love him or hate him, Gaddafi should get one of the Achievement of the Century awards for that. Everybody in the West was opposed and tried to smash it and said it couldn't be done. And that it's not quite the Great Pyramids, but that was an amazing achievement. Oh, and by the way, speaking of Gaddafi, did you know the day we attacked Libya? Do you know what that day was? That was the day that Libya's car factory was going public. Opening their first day. Because Gaddafi had designed a car that he thought was far better than the Western cars, that he thought were all useless, intentionally bad in every way. And anyway, he was an amazing mind. Not saying he was, a saint, but if you look into that guy and you look at his achievements, you'll see why Libya had to be smashed.
He gave some interesting speeches at the UN, for sure.
Well, he had great technical ideas of how to make the world a far better place. Let's just put it that way. And his car is a car I want. I would really, really pay to get one of his cars. Let's just put it that way. But of course, the factory was one of the first places to be destroyed. What a coincidence.
Huh.
They were hiding weapons of mass destruction there, no doubt.
When you get any of the designs, you'll be a person of interest. So I haven't got any, and I'll never get any. That's a promise. But anyway, the water is a control mechanism, right? Obviously, Las Vegas or L.A. or something, Phoenix, you can't even hope to go for days without water. And they've tried to privatize it everywhere, take over control, and raise the prices dramatically. So you even have like wars and revolutions over water now. If we get cheap energy, then we can make our own water from the atmosphere, right?
Sure.
So that's the first thing. But we still have to think about water and all its sources. There's all kinds of issues with this: health, atmospheric, environmental. We need to think of ways to clean water, and there are good ways, and they haven't been promoted. Because the sad truth is, dirty water has been more profitable in America than clean water. Now, I'm not talking about them putting poisonous chemicals in like fluoride. No, I'm talking about the business of environmentalism, environmental engineering, has been more profitable than simply cleaning water. And this will bother some people, but just as a most obvious thought experiment, what would it, there's that plastic dump out in the Pacific Ocean that circulates, and it's like, 500 kilometers across or something.
Right, it looks like one big jellyfish. Yeah, I've seen.
Right, and it kills millions of birds and fish and everything else, right? Now you think about that, do the engineering calculations. What would it cost to haul that thing somewhere and clean it up? Today's mega nets and boats and whatever. What are we talking about, $1 billion?
Probably not even that.
Probably less than $1 billion, right? So you sit there and say you care about the environment. This is not even a topic for discussion, right? It's not even like we're analyzing how to do it. It's just never going to happen, right?
It's for PR purposes anyway, plain. I mean, they love having stuff like that.
Of course. It's the business. It's the environment and pollution as a business, not as like how do we solve problems, right? So maybe I'm too much of an engineering type, but I like to look at things and say, okay, so how could we make things better, or how could we solve a problem? And we're not even discussing the problems, which is really annoying. But anyway, that particular thing could be solved for a very manageable amount of money, considering, we've got trillions of dollars to throw around, and we might even get others to chip in, like, the Japanese or somebody, right? Because after all, they do all this fishing in the ocean. They might want to see better, healthier fisheries or something. So we need to think about how to clean water. And unfortunately, we're going the other way, right? We get chemtrails, we get all kinds of things, and we don't really get, how can I say, we get a business. Like the federal government goes to cities and says, you can't have an outside reservoir. You got to spend $500 million to make it indoors, right? And it's like, well, what is the goal anyway? The goal is useless construction to Halliburton or something, right? The goal is not like, we don't, in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is, with Kennedy, remember he said the goal is by the end of the decade to put a man on the moon, right? And we can argue about, again, how effective Stanley Kubrick was, or how effective the Nazi secret space program was, or all this other stuff. But nonetheless, it's a clear goal that people worked on. And you kind of need general goals. And in the environment, we don't have general goals. And we need them, and we definitely need it for water. So how about you, Herm or Oolong? Any thoughts on water technology control?
Well, when you were talking about the space program, I was thinking, geez, if you believe it, 69, and what is it? I think I read a statistic where something like half of the world spends 80% of its time going to clean water and back, and I thought, yeah, that is absolutely outrageous. What is it, 40, 50 years later, that we can't get clean water available for people. So I don't know how one would squeeze certain countries in terms of water, though. Yeah, just because a lot of those countries just don't have a lot of resources. I mean, so I guess my question is for many of those developing countries, how would these large corporations gather any money from them? I can see how that could happen, for larger developed countries, and like you point out, there's a lot of graft and bribery and construction projects and completely needless, useless waste. But as far as the developing countries, they're still kind of stuck with the water systems they've always had, and there's no incentive, I think, at least from any world organization, to get them some clean water. I don't know. So I guess that was a long way of saying, gee, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to say we have fairly current examples. I mean, we have massive demonstrations, practically revolutions over water projects and privatization projects, like, let's say, in Bolivia, where the usual story, America installs somebody or otherwise arranges the necessary bribes, threats, and so on, to get some legislation passed that makes, let's say, water go up in price 500%. And it's owned by some joint American-French water consortium or something, right?
Right, who probably borrowed money from the World Bank or something. Right,
right, of course,
right.
Who got the money from you and me, right?
Right,
We
right.
paid for the whole thing. And anyway, then the people rebel because the poor people, can only afford a shower. If you've been to poor places in Latin America, you know that a bath is, bathtubs are a luxury item in many countries. When you're looking for bathtubs, you got to stay at a high-end hotel in some countries. And this is ridiculous. These poor people paying 5 times as much for water, and then they have revolutions, or they have revolts, or either the police shoots them down or they win. But so even poor people have money, But the other issue is beyond that. It's leverage to use with the governments, right? Because all governments have resources. All governments have trees or ports or bases that you can put the U.S. Air Force, or they have something you want. I mean, John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, or his other books give you some ideas of how you use that leverage. So in other words, it's partly to control the countries, not the individuals. This privatization is a relatively new thing for water as a control. They used needless debt for construction projects 30, 40 years ago. But now they're using more sophisticated things like privatize something and create kind of a variation of disaster capitalism, create a mess, and essentially blame the government there or otherwise have some leverage over them to try to control it or fix it. So this is ugly, evil stuff. And the point, though, to us is that water is something they've been using to control us as part of their slave grid. And we need to make sure that it doesn't get worse, and we hopefully can make it better, particularly in some of the poorer countries where they really are oppressed. You know, I mean, you can have a country with adequate water. Okay, how about look at the United States? Water bills in a place like Las Vegas or Phoenix tend to be lower than a place with unlimited water like Portland. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no.
What is that? What is going on here? How can that be? Right? There's something wrong in this picture. Right? And so we need to think long and hard about water, but we could really practically have a whole topic because there are health concerns. There are all kinds of things with water that are, and, you know, it's really a topic of mystical things too, right? It has very interesting properties, and it's kind of like the lifeblood for so many things. So it's certainly much more important. But, I mean, contaminated, unhealthy water probably does a lot to lower life expectancy or to dull our senses so that we're not aware, we're not as perceptive about certain things that are going on. So, you know, I think, did I hear you, Oolong, talk about how one of the purposes of chemtrails might be kind of to deaden our awareness? And I would say that if that's the case, then one would think that making the water less healthy would be a similar thing.
Yeah, agreed. And on that same token, I would say the GMO foods probably have some of that involved as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of aware of the Soviet space technology called the Skinar and the later branches of that, which was a very interesting thing, kind of like the from Star Trek Bones' device that cures everything.
Tricorder or whatever.
Yes, and I really like it, but it's not perfect, but it does do wonders in certain cases. And the inventors of that have talked about how it works much better in Eastern Europe or places where people haven't been exposed to GM food, because the GM food seems to totally ruin the electrical balance inside the cells. And this is worthy of testing. They're not really, obviously there is no research on this, but that makes perfect sense to me, that the GM food somehow causes within your body the electrical balance to get out of whack. And that could do all kinds of things, but it could certainly mean that, perhaps acupuncture wouldn't work as well, or anyway, there are a number of possibilities. But yeah, it makes perfect sense that the GM food is also kind of making us unaware, and that's why it looks like there's so many zombies out and about, right?
Although, you know, you'd early mentioned the educational system and the dumbing down, which I think is that's a whole other issue as well. But so I guess between that and growing up with GMO and with the water, yeah, I guess you have a fairly pliable population at the end of it. You know?
Well, I know I've looked at some people, younger people in the U.S. today, and I kind of wonder. It's kind of like something's been removed. I don't know how to put it. Do you know what I mean? It's not just the addiction to a cell phone or something. There's a certain kind of obliviousness.
The consciousness is dulled down.
something has been attacked, and maybe they don't even know it. But it's kind of depressing. And, traveling, even if you go to a poor country, right? So let's say you go to Bolivia or Nigeria or something, the poor people look very alive. If you look at their eyes, it's like they're suffering. I mean, they got some kind of injury, falling off a motorcycle on their hand or whatever. But they really look full of life, and you see it in their eyes. And unfortunately, particularly in the U.S., I see a lot of kind of deadened look. And I really think the people are victims. They're victims of intentional poisoning. And it doesn't help that the schools and also the TV are, and the electrical grid, inside buildings, the cycles they use and everything is scientifically designed to do this, I believe.
Yeah, well, the Russians are all into looking at the effects of what they call electrosmog, which and clearly people have reported, people who get the so-called smart wiring in their home also report some people report some health effects from it. So I think that's true.
Well, I can say, spending a little time with my friend in his new smart meter house, that there's something about it because I'm the kind of guy who avoids cell phones and all that. There's something about it. It just doesn't feel right. It's like anyway, maybe I'm imagining things, but I think the health effects of this, what can I say? My future house design is going to be, like on the dirt with a yurt or something. I like high tech, but I want it in the building next door.
Yeah, well, see, mine is going to be a tinfoil yurt, just to take care of the.
Well, but Herm, I have found through careful research that copper is the way to go. Copper works better at keeping out the bad waves, and it improves your own psychic abilities. So there you go. There you go. I heard it from Ingo Swann himself. So there you go. You can take that to the bank. Anyway, on that note, I suppose we could wrap it up. We're getting along. Unless there are any closing thoughts or what have you. Oolong, anything?
No, I think
Herm,
we've covered just about everything.
Well, Plain, I just want to congratulate you at least on a personal basis after having a very tiring and somewhat depressing day for various reasons. To hear some optimism shining behind your words was quite pleasant. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for, again, giving me lots of stuff to think about, and I'm sure our listeners as well.
Well, you're welcome. Oolong, any thoughts?
Nah, I'm still totally depressed.
You're still totally depressed. Well, come join me. Let's get out of the U.S. Come join me. We can do some romping around Asia or something.
Sounds like a plan.
Got to go further south and get some light.
Well, I tell you what, I was in South America and definitely enjoyed it. So if that's your cup of tea, give it a shot. Okay, well, let's call it a day.
All right, thanks again,
thank you.
Plain.
Thanks.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.